Hey guys, how is everybody? Are you guys doing good? Well, I am not. Thanks to your suggestion, I've been playing through Fargo's soul mod on Eternity mode, and I don't think you all understand how hard Eternity mode actually is. Everything that I thought I knew about Terraria, poof, it's gone. Everything is different. The enemies do different things. Every single boss is reworked to make my life a living hell. Even some of the biomes are out to get me by inflicting all sorts of weird debuffs. I have gone through so much pain and suffering to make this video for you guys, so you better like this video, you better subscribe, and most importantly, you better leave a comment, because I love talking to each and every single one of you. I hate you all for making me do this. Here's the video. On day 1, when I spawned in, I found a weird looking statue of the Mutant NPC holding a star. I grabbed the star right from the statue's hands and noticed that it starts a new difficulty called Eternity mode. I have no clue what this does. All I really know is that it makes all this much harder. And being the clinically insane person that I am, I used the star and started Eternity mode. It also summoned the Deviant. The Deviant ended up giving me a bunch of starter stuff, and it's so nice to be able to skip the boring part of Terraria, like getting Hermes boots and a cloud in a bottle and all that stuff. A bunch of stuff the Deviant gave me was for housing, so I decided to make a house right away. I decided to make my house and the houses for the NPCs separate because I don't want to live with the Deviant. It's given me real bad vibes. I then used another item the Deviant gave me to instantly carve a hole halfway to hell. I then jumped right in and got to mining. I ended up leaving the mine super duper early on day 2 to smelt some ores, and I ended up making a platinum broadsword and a tungsten chestplate. I also ended up finishing my house and made a second floor to put the magic storage on. Afterwards, I went mining some more, and it was just the same old mining stuff. I was mainly looking for tungsten and life crystals. I was trying to hold back, but on day 3 I got super curious as to what this mod actually has to offer, and when I used the recipe browser there were barely any weapons, but there's an unbelievable amount of equipment to use. Look at all these little enchantments. Oh my god. There's an enchantment for just about everything. There's a wood enchantment, there's a jungle wood enchantment, there's a pumpkin enchantment, there's a copper enchantment, and each of these enchantments require a whole lot of work to make. Each enchantment typically requires the full armor set of whatever you're trying to make. So for like the wood enchantment, you need the full wooden armor set, and for the copper enchantment, you need the full copper armor set. But then you also need a few other various things. Like for some of the wood ones, there's fruit, and like for the copper one, you need the copper short sword, and just various random stuff like that. But when you combine them all together, you get some sort of random buff. Like I know the wood one, for each like NPC or enemy or animal or whatever you see, it'll decrease the prices in the shops. For most of the early game enchantments, I will need a lot of ore in order to combine all the armors and weapons, so I went right back to mining and grabbed every single ore I could get my grimy little fingers on. Once night had arrived, a blood moon came, and then it changed its mind for whatever reason. I still don't know. I just continued mining. On day 4, I did more of the boring stuff. I did more NPC housing, more mining for ores, and I think I almost have enough for some of the stuff. Since I think I almost have enough, I came back up from mining and began smelting some of the ores. That's when the Deviant walked into my house, and I decided I would talk to him, see if he has anything new to sell. And he has this thing called a Pandora's Box, and when I used it, it actually almost killed me. It just summoned a bunch of random NPCs, and ended up summoning one of the blood crawlers and an antlion swarmer. Oh my god, it was crazy, but I got a turtle out of it, so it's all okay. After that whole fiasco, I began making the iron enchantment, and to make the iron enchantment I needed an apricot, which I can only get from trees, so I began shaking a whole bunch of trees. While I was shaking all these trees down, I noticed that there's a whole bunch of the big like living trees where like the little rooms are under them. After a little bit of shaking, I did end up getting the apricot. Before heading to an altar to make the iron enchantment, I wanted to see if I could make any other enchantments before heading out, and not only did I have all of the stuff to make the wood enchantment, but I pretty much had everything for the lead enchantment as well. I just needed a peach. On day 5, after grabbing all the stuff I needed for the iron, wood, and lead enchantment, I left to go find an altar. On my way to find an altar, I was shaking down every single tree to just try and get a peach to finish off the lead enchantment, and while I was doing this, I noticed that there are so many big trees on this side of the world as well. While being swarmed by enemies all the way to the Crimson, I noticed that some enemies also have new abilities, like the Demon Eyes can charge at you now, for whatever reason. Eventually, after a little bit more walking, I ended up dying in the desert because the enemies are just cracked at this point in the game. After a few more tries, I finally found the Crimson and made the iron and wood enchantments, but I didn't make the lead one because I never found a peach. The wooden enchantment is pretty much a discount in shops that scales with how much I've completed the bestiary, and the iron enchantment gives me 33% not to consume more while smelting them into bars. For the rest of the night, I was trying to get fruits for other enchantments to no avail. And then the Eye of Cthulhu spawned, and can somebody tell me what the fuck is that? I guess it looks like Eternity Mode reworks all the bosses, because the Eye of Cthulhu was crazy. After realizing that this mod is going to be unbelievably hard to beat, I started to struggle with enchantments and stuff, because each enchantment needs some really random thing as the last, little piece, and most of the wood ones require a fruit, and I just can't seem to get any fruits. On day 6, I spent all day smacking trees to get fruit, and I ended up getting the blood fruit and a peach, so I made the lead and shadewood enchantments, and they were both so good. The lead enchantment gives enemies lead poisoning when I hit them, and allows me to take 40% less damage over time, and the shadewood enchantment gives me a bleeding aura, and causes enemies to spew damaging blood when struck. After making these enchantments, I spent the rest of the day finishing getting the materials for the cactus enchantment, which was fishing for a flounder and buying the Secrets of the Sands painting. I spent the next morning getting these two materials and eventually got them. Afterwards, I began shaking more trees, this time in the snow biome to try getting a plum, and I actually got it. So I gathered the materials for the boreal wood enchantment and made both the cactus and the boreal wood enchantment. And let me just say, the boreal wood enchantment is much better than the cactus one. I just realized that it's boreal, not boreal. I'm going to keep the audio in anyway, but the boreal enchantment fires 3 snowballs and the cactus enchantment shoots cactus needles in all directions. It causes enemies to spew needles when killed. I spent the rest of the day trying to get the rest of my hearts. I spent most of day 8 still trying to get the rest of my hearts, and when night arrived, the Eye of Cthulhu spawned. I lost, but it was pretty close. All I wrote on my notes is, where did all these zombies come from? I have no clue about what happened here, so just here's the clip. On day 9, I summoned and defeated the first modded boss, the Trojan Squirrel. From the squirrel, I got this snowball magic weapon that, you summon a snowball, and the more you push it, the bigger it gets, and the more damage it'll do, and it seems pretty good, but it also seems really ass. Afterwards, I defeated the King Slime, and got a neat little shield from him, but it's kind of ass. I then spent some time farming both of the bosses for the other drops they have, and none of them ended up being very good at all. Once that had arrived, I began fighting the Eye of Cthulhu again, but I ended up losing because a second one spawned mid-fight for whatever reason. So after this fight, I summoned the Eye of Cthulhu again and defeated it. On day 10, I began making more storage and farming the Trojan Squirrel a bit just because it drops a 60 damage summon weapon that I want, but I honestly don't think I can get that till hard mode anyways. After farming for a bit, I made more housing and then lost to the Brain of Cthulhu. On day 11, the stupid ass goblin army decided to show up, and oh my god, it was so much more annoying than usual. After each and every goblin death, they drop these little red ball things and they explode, and oh my god, they were horrible. I then spent the rest of the day fighting and losing to the Brain of Cthulhu. I then began trying and failing over and over and over to the Brain of Cthulhu for the next 4 days straight. For the next 4 days straight, I just tried and I lost. I tried and I lost. I tried and I lost. It was the worst time I've ever had fighting the Brain of Cthulhu in my life. But on day 15, I was finally able to defeat it. That boss fight was absolutely insane. The amount of illusions that was spawned from him, oh my god, I was confused the entire fight. From the Brain of Cthulhu, I got a Gutted Heart, an equipable that spawns 5 creepers around me to take damage for me, and it also increases my health by 10%. I then used the Crimtane Ore to make the Lightning Rod, a melee weapon that strikes lightning from the sky, and I used some of it to make Crimson Armor. On day 16, I began getting Hellstone, because there was no way I was going to fight anything after the Brain of Cthulhu without Molten Armor. Eventually, after getting a bunch of Hellstone, I was able to make the Molten Armor and the Molten Bow. After making the Molten Armor, I began doing research and noticed that the Fossil enchantment is way overpowered because it allows you to self-heal, so I began getting Sturdy Fossils ASAP. After a while, I ended up getting enough and began to farm enemies for the last component, the Mandible Blade. Eventually, after killing a bunch of antlions, I ended up just getting a banner, so I used the Solidifier to convert the banner into the Mandible Blade. And with it, I made the Fossil enchantment. It's definitely not as good as I thought it would be, because it says it spawns a few bones per hit that heal for 20 HP, but they barely spawn at all, so this was kind of a waste of time, to be honest. Afterwards, I began doing more research into more enchantments, and I decided to try the Pumpkin enchantment next, so I planted pumpkin seeds. I then summoned the Slime Rain to get a Pinky to spawn so that I could use the pink gel and make the final component, the Molotov. And once I made Molotovs, I made the Pumpkin enchantment, and it's just not that good. The Pumpkin enchantment allows pumpkins to grow under my feet, and when fully grown, they heal for 25 HP and spawn damaging embers. But I'm not even on my feet that much, especially during boss fights. I'm just kind of flying around, so they don't even really spawn. The next day, I decided to make the Skeletron Arena, and after the Skeletron Arena was done, I began looking for an Anklet of the Wind. While looking for an Anklet of the Wind, I got the perfect opportunity to actually test out the Fossil enchantment, and it isn't so bad. Like, the bones spawn kind of often, but it's not as bad as I was giving it earlier. After looking around for a while, I was just unable to find an Anklet of the Wind. On day 19, I started and lost to the Skeletron, and I ended up getting pretty close to defeating it, but he regrows his arms, so that throws a huge wrench in my whole operation here. Since I couldn't fight the Skeletron again until night arrived, I began trying to figure out what to do to become stronger, and I decided that I needed to be able to kill the Brain of Cthulhu in order to get a whole bunch of money and reforge everything I have to warding. But in order to do that, I would need a different approach to fighting the Brain of Cthulhu, because I only barely won the first time I beat him. I began looking around for the meteor that landed earlier, and once I found it, I grabbed all the meteorite I could and made meteorite armor and the space gun to fight the Brain of Cthulhu, but motherfucker, I just cannot beat the Brain of Cthulhu. Like, the one time I did it, I got unbelievably lucky. I just cannot beat this thing. On day 20, I ended up beating him though, so everything was fine. I sold literally everything I got from the fight and used all of my money to reforge every single thing that I have, including my weapons. After I had reforged everything, I figured out how to beat the Brain of Cthulhu every single time, and my only issue is that I just needed to embrace the melee. On day 21, I also decided to defeat the Eater of Worlds to get the Eater of Worlds staff and to get a whole bunch of Demonite so that I could make the Shadow enchantment. After fighting the worm a couple of times, I ended up making the Shadow enchantment, and I think it's good, but I don't really know yet. The Shadow enchantment summons 2 Shadow Orbs that will orbit around me, and attacking one of these orbs will cause it to release a burst of homing Shadow energy. Once I added these 2 orbs, I just had so much shit orbiting around me. It was so funny to look at. Later that night, I started a blood moon and began farming frozen zombies for snow clothes so that I could make the snow enchantment. I continued farming frozen zombies into day 22, and eventually I ended up getting all the pieces all in one night, which was pretty crazy. But as soon as the blood moon ended, a goblin army started, and oh my god, I wiped the floor with them. I was like a god to them. Oh my god. At this point, I was feeling very, very strong, but I'm sure that the Skeletron is going to humble the fuck out of me. Later on, I made the Snow enchantment, and it allows me to slow down enemies for 15 seconds, and it briefly causes frost burns, so I tried it on the Skeletron. And it's so good, it actually pretty much freezes the Skeletron. It was so good, but I still lost. But from the Skeletron, I ended up getting a spawner that I can use whenever, as long as it's night. But when I use it, it resets the night to 7:30 p.m. So I'm just going to stretch this night on forever until I beat the Skeletron. I tried beating the Skeletron for it was probably like over an hour, and I just could not beat it. I tried over and over and over, and I just could not beat it. But eventually, by the end of day 22, I defeated the Skeletron. From the Skeletron, I got something called a Necromantic Brew, an equipable that increases speed when dashing by 50%, and when I dash, I take 75% less contact damage and reflect that 100% damage back to the attacker. And it also summons 2 Skeletron hands to whack enemies for me. Right after sorting through all of my loot, I explored the dungeon, and all I need from it are keys because I can use those keys and the crates I got from the Skeletron to make literally anything I need from the dungeon. Once I had a couple of the gold keys, I went back home and made myself my very own Shadow Key. I then went to hell to find the Sun Fury, a weapon I knew would deal like 80 damage. Eventually I ended up finding it and I went right back to the dungeon to get a bunch of bones for the Necro enchantment. After getting enough bones, on day 23 I made a graveyard back at home to get the still life painting for the Necro enchantment. Once I had the painting, I made the Necro enchantment. It gives me the properties of the Bone Glove and spawns bone piles on enemy deaths that I can turn into friendly dungeon guardians that just launch at enemies. After being able to defeat the Skeletron and upping my arsenal like crazy, I was feeling pretty confident and pretty strong. So strong that I decided that I wanted to make the Deviant summon, but I unfortunately had to wait until night to get some chum buckets. While I was waiting for night to arrive, I began gathering the materials to make the Jungle enchantment and the Ancient Cobalt enchantment. Once I had all the materials, I made the Jungle enchantment and it gives me a cool jump boost, but I also made the Ancient Cobalt enchantment and that gives me an even cooler, more useful jump boost. On day 24, I summoned a Blood Moon and got the chum buckets, and it was unbelievably hard. I don't know, the Blood Moon is it's just crazy. With the chum buckets, I made the Deviant summon, summoned the Deviant, and what the fuck? This boss cannot be real. This boss just isn't real. It's just not real. I continued to attempt the Deviant a few more times, just trying to get a feel for this boss and deciding that I cannot be melee with this boss. And since I have so many things that are already around me, I'll switch to the Summoner class. So I went into the dungeon, got a bunch of bones, made the Spinal Tap, and this works so much better on the Deviant. I spent the entirety of day 25, like from day to night, trying to defeat the Deviant, and I just could not get there no matter how hard I tried. I tried over and over and over, and I just wasn't getting anywhere. But on day 26, as I was about to give up for the day, I defeated the Deviant. The Deviant boss fight overall was a pretty fun boss fight, and it definitely reminded me of all the other bosses from the Stars Above mod. The Deviant ended up giving me deviating energy, and I cannot use it until way later in the game, so it doesn't even really matter right now. Afterwards, I decided it was about time to start preparing for the Wall of Flesh, so I made an insta-bridge to create a bridge of platforms all across Hell, but I have to get to one side of Hell first before I use it, so I don't just create half the bridge. Once I got far enough, I used the insta-bridge, and it turns out it goes both ways. Not just one way like with the other insta-bridge. I wasted a whole bunch of time. After making this bridge, I decided to attempt the wall of flesh, and I got up to about 50%, and this boss is just not that difficult, I don't think. This boss may not have been super difficult, but I still spent the next 3 entire days trying to defeat it. On day 27, I was getting nowhere. On day 28, I was still getting nowhere, but I decided that the buildings weren't working, and I decided to like run along the path and break down all of the buildings so that I could hit the wall of flesh from wherever. And on day 29, I was still trying, but couldn't defeat it. But eventually, after about an hour of failed attempts, I defeated the wall of flesh. Like I said, the boss fight was pretty easy. It's just that towards the end, after the 50% health line, it just, everything ramped up, everything got faster, and I just had to move and think and remember everything faster. As soon as the wall of flesh died, it dropped so many things. There was like an entire inventory full of things that just came spewing out of its body. On day 30 from the Wall of Flesh, I got these divine crates that give me some useful stuff to start hard mode, like the orichalcum bars, souls of light, and crystals. I also got this thing that I ended up using right away that gets rid of every natural altar in the world, so I don't have to mine them. But when I did, it summoned an army of wraiths to my house. Like, there was at least like 30 of them. There were so many. And it not only killed me, but it also killed just about every single NPC that I had at home. After respawning, I went back to where I killed the Wall of Flesh to grab the rest of the drops from him, and I ended up getting angel wings, a mithril anvil, and an adamantite forge. I also ended up getting this pungent eyeball that increases the spawn rate of rare enemies, so I'm just going to keep it on me for later purposes. Right after evaluating all my loot, I began farming spiders for their fangs, and once I had enough fangs, I made the spider armor, the spider staff, and the queen spider staff. I then took and reforged all of my gear to get it in the best shape that it could possibly be in. I ended up spending the rest of the night getting a shit ton of hard mode ores to make the respective enchantments. I continued mining ores into day 31, and eventually I had about 700 ore for all 3 types in my world, and after looking at all the enchantments, this is what I needed to make. For the cobalt enchantment, I still needed the explosive trap rod. For the palladium enchantment, I still needed the life drain and the underground reward, which is just a painting. For the mithril enchantment, I still needed the clockwork assault rifle, the gatling gator, and the onyx blaster. For the orichalcum enchantment, I still needed the flower of frost and the cursed flames. For the adamantite enchantment, I still needed the quad barrel shotgun. And finally, for the titanium enchantment, I still needed the Schick, the crystal storm, and the crystal vial shard. Now before getting into all of the hard mode ore enchantments, I wanted to finish the pre-hard mode ones first, and this is what I needed to make for those. For the tin enchantment, I needed the revolver. For the copper enchantment, I needed the thunder zapper. I was already done with the iron enchantment and the lead enchantment. For the tungsten enchantment, I needed the candy cane sword. For the gold enchantment, I needed the greedy ring. For the platinum enchantment, I needed the diamond squirrel and the garden gnome. And while looking over all of these enchantments, I ended up finishing the silver and obsidian enchantment, but neither of them were really good, so I just threw them in my storage. With all these enchantments in the back of my mind, I wanted to know which one was best, so I ended up doing a little research online, and I found out that for the Fargo soul mod, there's this entire Google Doc full of every single item, when you should have it, and a 1 out of 5 star rating for how good it is. And I ended up looking over this thing a whole lot. So throughout the last 30 days, I have been kidnapping traveling merchants because I know I can turn them into stuff that the traveling merchant would sell eventually. And on day 32, I used the kidnapped traveling merchants that I had, along with some money, to get the revolver and make the tin enchantment. Afterwards, I went out and got an oasis crate and used it to make the thunder zapper to make the copper enchantment. After making all this, I realized that I can't even finish all the pre-hard mode ore enchantments because I need to fight the pirate army and I can't get a candy cane sword till post-Plantera. What's up with that? Why would you put a post-Plantera item as one of the pre-hard mode enchantments? I decided to halt all productions on the pre-hard mode ore enchantments and move right on to the wooden enchantments. On day 33, I began shaking trees for a pineapple, and once I actually got one, I used it to make the rich mahogany enchantment. Afterwards, I bought a whole bunch of ebon wood from the builder, shook trees to get a blood orange and converted it into a black currant, and converted the Dead Man Comes Alive painting into the Lightless Chasms painting to make the ebon wood enchantment. Later on, I got a banana, a coconut, and some coral to make the palm wood enchantment. To finish off my day, I got a starfruit and some pearl wood for the pearl wood enchantment. The last thing that I need to make the pearl wood enchantment was a lightning bug, and they're supposed to spawn at night on the surface of the hollow, but one just wouldn't spawn. I'll have to try again at the next night, I guess. Since the pearl wood enchantment is the last wood enchantment that I need, I moved on to hard mode enchantments. So I got the explosive trap rod and made the cobalt enchantment, and it is so good. I also bought the quad barrel shotgun from the arms dealer to make the adamantite enchantment, but it turns out it's only good for the ranged class. I decided that I wanted to make the titanium enchantment next because the Google Doc that I mentioned earlier said it's a 5-star rating, it's a game-changing enchantment. So I went ahead and made the Schick and spent the rest of my day farming enemies for souls of light. I got to the hollow on day 35, and while farming for them, I guess the gravity is reversed in the underground hollow because I'm literally upside down. It's really hard to maneuver. Once I thought I had enough souls of light, I ended up making the crystal storm, and now I just need to figure out how I'm going to defeat a hollowed mimic for the crystal vial shard. I figured that I was going to need to up my arsenal a little bit to be able to defeat a mimic, so I took some time off from enchantments to make myself the cool whip, and I ended up killing an ice golem and farming souls for it. I can't remember why, but I spent the rest of my day farming for more souls of light. Okay, now I remembered why, because on day 36 I used the souls to summon a hollowed mimic. I ended up beating it, but I didn't get the Vile Shard. Since I didn't get the Crystal Vile Shard, I spent the rest of my day farming for more souls of light. On day 37, I got so sick of walking to the hollow just to get souls of light every single time, so I decided I was going to start making pylons. I made housing in the hollow, jungle, and snow biomes and spent all day snatching everybody up with my bug net and getting them all to their correct houses and the correct pylons all in order. While I waited for that to figure itself out, I ended up fighting another hollowed mimic, and I got the Crystal Vile Shard, which was pretty cool. So I made the titanium enchantment, and the Google Doc was right. It is amazing. The next day, I made one last group of homes underground for that pylon. Afterwards, I began getting the materials for the Mithril enchantment, so I ended up getting the Clockwork Assault Rifle, I began getting Dark Shards for the Onyx Blaster, and getting a few more Souls of Light. Once I got those Souls of Light, I made the Onyx Blaster. I went back to the hollowed biome at night to check if the lightning bugs were there, but they still wouldn't spawn. I think it's because the biome is like half hollow, half crimson. I spent the entirety of day 39 farming for Souls of Night to fight crimson mimics to try getting the life drain and not getting the life drain. On day 40, I wanted to take a break from mimics to get an Ichor Flask, and in order to do that, I had to defeat the Queen Bee to get the what's his name. I went to the jungle and found a beehive and defeated the Queen Bee with ease, obviously because I'm in hard mode, and while waiting for the voodoo guy to spawn, I noticed that the crates that I got from the Queen Bee allowed me to finally make an Anklet of the Wind for lightning boots. It's crazy that I'm in hard mode and I didn't have lightning boots. Once I made the lightning boots, I noticed that I could upgrade them to the Zypher's boots instead of the Frostbark boots, but I'm going to end up needing a whoopee cushion for it. The only way to get a whoopee cushion is to kill those big ass worms underground, so I went to the Deviant to try buying a summon for it, and they had the summon, but they also had mimic summons, which means that I wasted all this time farming for souls when I didn't need to, and I also didn't have to farm for them anymore. This was great. Eventually, after killing like 30 worms, I got the whoopee cushion and made the Zypher's boots. I bought one Crimson Mimic spawn, just one from the Deviant, and got the life drain instantly. With it now in my possession, I made the Palladium enchantment. I again used one Mimic spawn from the Deviant and got the Flower Frost instantly. I ended up making the Orichalcum enchantment. These Mimic spawns are crazy. I get whatever I need. After getting through most of the enchantments, on day 41 I reevaluated what else I needed, and all I needed to be able to combine all the rest of the enchantments is the Gatling Gator for the hard mode ore enchantments, the Greedy Ring, Candy Sword, and a Garden Gnome for the pre-hard mode ore enchantments, and a Lightning Bug for the wooden enchantments. I started with the Greedy Ring, so I went to the ocean and began farming enemies for a pirate map, and I got one really fast. I then used the map to summon the pirate army, and from the pirate army with all the trophies and flags that I got, I converted them into like what I could, but I need to fight them again to finish everything. So I summoned them again and made the Greedy Ring once they were all defeated. On day 42, I decided that I would give the Destroyer a go, and that shit is hard. That shit is hard. My biggest issue with trying to get the Gatling Gator was that I didn't have enough traveling merchants, and the traveling merchants take a pretty long while to come around. But what I ended up figuring out is that I can make traveling merchants by using the actual merchant and like converting him to a traveling merchant. So I grabbed my merchant, ground him up into a little meatball, and configured that meatball around and made not one but two traveling merchants. I then made the Gatling Gator and used it to make the Mithril enchantment. But this is when I came to a horrible realization. I realized that I can't combine any of these enchantments until post Moonlord, because all of them to be combined require the Crucible of the Cosmos, and that requires Luminite to make. I'm not going to be able to use any of this stuff together until post Moonlord. Fuck my life, dude. I wasted so much time on this. I mean, I guess it'll be beneficial later on, but as of now, I have wasted so much time. Later that night, I was angry. I was furious, so I attempted the Destroyer again, and I lost, but I got it down to 50%. Regardless of the whole Crucible of the Cosmos thing, on day 43 I began gathering the things to make the Bee enchantment. While doing this, I accidentally enraged the Queen Bee, not once, but twice. After fighting the Queen Bee a couple of times, I realized that I don't like my current summon at all. It just doesn't hit where I want it to hit because it's like ground based and it doesn't fly around. So I began having a crisis over what new minion I should get. So later that night, I summoned a Blood Moon and tried fishing to summon Dread Nautilus to get the Sanguine Staff, but I ended up failing. At the end of the night, I ended up losing to the Destroyer. On day 44, I ended up switching back to melee because as much as I want to be a summoner, Eternity mode is just too hard. It's just too hard, I need more defense. I ended up making full titanium armor and this weapon called the Anchor, but the Anchor wasn't good, I wanted a new one. I then made the Bee enchantment and it turns out it's pretty good, but I'm way too far into the game to actually end up using it. Afterwards, I began researching melee weapons to get and decided to make the Tao of Pow and get banana rings, because banana rings are overpowered in any playthrough you do. I wanted to get the banana rings first, obviously, so I summoned a Blood Moon and spent the rest of day 44 and the morning of day 45 getting them, and I only ended up getting one banana ring. Afterwards, I began farming for a Dark Shard to start making the Tao of Pow, and I eventually did end up getting one and making it, and the Tao of Pow is pretty sweet, it does a whole bunch of damage. I then went down to Hell and killed the Wall of Flesh for the Warrior Emblem. I spent the rest of my night farming for more banana rings, and on day 46 I ended with 4 more. It was pretty cool. I then reforged all of them to be godly, and I decided to make the Berserker's Glove, so I began farming mimics. Now, I don't know what was going on, but I swear to God I killed like 10 fucking mimics, and I just could not get the blue glove. I don't know why it was taking so long, and for reference, each mimic spawn costs like 30 gold coins, so I was going through platinum at this point. I did get the Philosopher's Stone though, so I decided that I will make the Charm of Myths. After a few more mimic deaths, on day 47 I got the Titan Glove. I then used the Titan Glove to make the Power Glove, and then used the Power Glove to make the Berserker's Glove. The next day I fought the Destroyer, and I got him to 2% health. And then I ended up losing, because it's absolutely bananas for the last 10% of that fight, but I will definitely kill it next time. I then spent most of my day just getting money, because I used up all of it with those goddamn mimics. And just look at how many brains are on my screen. Just look at them. There's gotta be at least like 1 brain. Later on, a couple of minutes before I would fight the Destroyer again, I decided to start getting things ready for when all of the mechanical bosses are defeated. So I got all the requirements for the next level of boots, other than the souls, obviously. I then defeated the Destroyer. On day 49, I noticed that all I need are hollowed bars, which I have now, to start making the cool ass stuff from this mod like the Barbarian's Essence and the Bionomic Cluster, so I began making the Bionomic Cluster first. This thing requires a whole bunch of different components that you can get throughout the game, and I already have the Squeaky Toy and the Security Wallet, so all I need is the Concentrated Rainbow Matter, a Wyvern Feather, a Frigid Gemstone, the Sands of Time, a Tribal Charm, a Mystic Skull, an Ordinary Carrot, a Wretched Pouch, the Nymph's Perfume, and Tim's Concoction. But nope, I can't make it, because as it turns out, to get the Ordinary Carrot, it needs to be Christmas, so you can summon the Frost Legion, and if it's not Christmas, you can summon the Frost Legion post-Plantera. So I have to wait till post-Plantera. So this fucking sucks. After this stupid-ass realization, I ended up making 5 light discs just to realize that they only do 4 more damage than the banana rings, and they don't go as far, or as fast. Everything's going downhill right now. Regardless about all this stupid stuff that's going on, I started getting the things for the Bionomic Cluster anyways. I spent the rest of my day getting the Concentrated Rainbow Matter and the Wyvern Feather. Later that night, I began trying to defeat the twins, and this boss, just like the Skeletron, resets the day to 7:30 PM every time it starts, so I'm just gonna kill this boss tonight. I just cannot. I actually just can't. I give up for now. What do? I give up for now. I need something like the Queen Slime mount, because what's his name? Spasmatism is just too fast. I just keep dying. I tried for so long, I just keep dying. On day 50, I began fighting the Queen Slime over and over and over again to try getting the Queen Slime mount, and I always ended up getting her to like 20% health, but I just couldn't get it any lower. Eventually, after a couple more tries, I ended up defeating the Queen Slime only because I noticed that it's way safer to be under her than to fly around and try to avoid everything. Along with the Queen Slime mount, I also got a pair of Eternity Mode wings called the Jellic Wings, and they're pretty fire. Later that night, I tried to defeat the twins and the Skeletron Prime, but I had no luck with either of them. After about like an hour or 2 of trying on each boss, I ended up walking outside, and I ended up seeing a snowflake fall. Hey, look at it, look at everybody, it's Christmas. It's Christmas time. I can get the carrot now, it's Christmas time. I totally didn't set my computer's time to be December 16th. It's Christmas time, everybody. I can get the carrot now. Okay, so I may have smudged the time on my computer just a little bit so that I could get the Ordinary Carrot and make the Bionomic Cluster. But if you think this is cheating, go f*** yourself. Because if I had played this around Christmas, you guys wouldn't have cared at all. So I'm in the right here. I'm in the right here. Anyways, I finished the day farming for presents and continued doing this into day 51. Once I thought I had enough presents, I ended up using those presents to make the candy cane sword, the red rider, the hand warmer, a toolbox, and the dog whistle. I then spent the second part of my day dealing with all of these goddamn snowmen in the Frost Legion, and it took me so long and I didn't get the carrot at all. On day 52, now that I can buy the snow globe, I ended up fixing the time on my computer and continued farming snowmen until I got the ordinary carrot. I finished off my day by farming the sand elemental until I got the sands of time. On day 53, I swiped up the deviant and molded their body into a jungle chest and farmed those until I got the charred idol. The next item on my list was the mystic skull that drops from the rune wizard, but since I haven't met a rune wizard before, I have to wait for one to spawn underground. After a lot of waiting around and nothing happening, I researched and found out that gem robes, when equipped, can increase the spawn rate of them, and I also equipped the pungent eyeball in my inventory to increase the rare enemy spawns. After a little bit, one did spawn, but it killed me. On day 54, waiting for another rune wizard to spawn, Tim also ended up spawning, and once killed, I can now farm him. Using the wizard hat that I got from the first time I killed Tim, I was able to make a rune wizard spawn, so I was able to spawn the rune wizard, and now I can farm him. I first farmed Tim for the Tim's concoction, I then farmed the rune wizard for the mystic skull, and then finished off by summoning and farming the nymph until I got the nymph's perfume. I finished off my day by summoning the goblin army so that I can kill the goblin summoner for the wretched pouch. On day 55, I got the wretched pouch and finally made the bionomic cluster, and it seems super duper good. Like look at all these things it gives me. But whenever I attack, I move slower than a snail. This was a major waste of time because if I try to use this while fighting a boss, I'm just gonna die. Afterwards, I ended up making this thing called the Supreme Deathbringer Fairy, and it just combines all the early game Eternity boss drops, and I mean, it's alright. I spent my night trying over and over again to try to defeat either the twins or the Skeletron, but I just couldn't kill either of them. After fighting them for a while and getting absolutely nowhere, an idea popped into my head. I decided to switch back to Summoner because the Bionomic Cluster, you can still get about half of the buffs or debuffs or whatever if it's just sitting in your inventory. And if I end up leaving it in my inventory and switching to Summoner, I can have my minions attack and still get all the buffs from the Bionomic Cluster. I thought it was a pretty good idea. Once I did this, I tried for like another hour and still got nowhere. I got much further, but still pretty much nowhere. I ended up spending the entirety of day 56 gathering all the materials together to try and make the Occultist Essence. What it does is just buffs like the speed and damage of my summons, it increases my summons, it increases my sentries, and just all that. And by the end of the day, I was able to make it. I spent the morning of day 57 just losing over and over to the same two bosses. After a while of just losing my shit, I decided that I was going to fix up the boss arena, because obviously I'm not the one at fault, it's the game. While gathering all the materials I was going to need to fix up this stupid ass arena, I accidentally placed an insta-bridge above my house. And that was my breaking point. I was done playing the game for the day. Once I got back on, I got on with a goal. I began fighting the Old One's army so I can get the Huntress armor set and the Phantom Phoenix to make the Huntress enchantment. I was actually able to defeat them on my first try, just barely, but I still ended up doing it. I needed more defender medals though, so on day 58 I began doing it again. After a few more tries, I ended up having enough medals, but I still needed the Phantom Phoenix, so I kept fighting them again. Eventually I ended up getting it and making the Huntress enchantment. I also ended up making the Platinum and Tungsten enchantment because apparently I could. I wanted the Huntress enchantment because it causes attacks to ignore 10 enemy defense and deal 5 flat extra damage. Each successive attack ignores an additional 10 defense and deals 5 more damage, and this can stack up to 10 times. The only issue with this is that homing and minion attacks do not increase any of these bonuses, and missing any attack will reset these bonuses back to 0. I went to go fight the twins in the Skeletron thinking this was going to be my breakthrough, but it was the same shit as earlier. I was getting absolutely nowhere. On day 59, I got super duper close to defeating the twins. On the morning of day 60, I was still fighting the twins and I just kept getting super duper close, so I slept all day long, and at the end of the day, I had finally defeated the twins. Quick funny little story, in between day 58 and day 59, I ended up getting so mad at this game, so mad at the twins and the Skeletron, that I ended up quitting the mod and recording the entirety of the Secrets of the Shadows video. Like this Fargo's video was supposed to come out before that, but because I got pissed, it came out afterwards. On day 61, I equipped the Eternity drop that I got from the twins, the Fused Lens, which grants immunity to Cursed Inferno and Ichor. When inflicted with Cursed Inferno, I get 15% increased attack speed. When inflicted with Ichor, I get 15% increased critical strike chance. When losing health, I deal Cursed Inferno and Ichor, and I can inflict myself with Cursed Inferno and Ichor for 30 seconds to gain all of these buffs. I spent the rest of my day attempting the Skeletron Prime, but obviously losing. On day 62, I decided to gather up all of the materials I would need for the Barbarian's Essence, and then made it. And it's kind of like the Warrior Emblem, but with a whole bunch more buffs. After I made this, I noticed that there was a gap in my banana rings when I throw them, so I ended up sleeping until night and summoned a Blood Moon to get 2 more banana rings. Also, if you're confused, at this point I was just switching back and forth between Summoner and Melee, so I was equipping the Spider Armor and then the Titan Armor. I was switching weapons back and forth, so everything's kind of wonky here. Now that I had all of these banana rings, on day 63 I thought I would fight the Skeletron Prime just to get into the groove of things, since at this point I just started my recording. But I actually did not expect to win. I beat the Skeletron Prime on this fight. It was crazy. With all the Eternity drops from the mechanical bosses, I was able to make the dubious circuitry, and it does a whole lot of stuff that I do not want to read. So here's everything it does. I'll give you some time to read it. Afterwards, I ended up making a Drax and spent some time in the jungle mining chlorophyte. Once night had arrived, I thought I had enough chlorophyte, so I summoned a Blood Moon and farmed giant tortoises for turtle shells. At this point, I already had 2 turtle shells, but I wanted enough for both the armor that I was going to use and the enchantment that I'm going to end up needing later. By the end of the Blood Moon on day 64, I ended up having the 4 turtle shells and made the turtle armor. I also made the Knight's Edge in preparation for the true Knight's Edge. I just need more Souls of Light. So I was gonna fight the Destroyer again, but I just bought them. Using them, I made the true Knight's Edge, and I also upgraded my Cypher boots to the Aeolus boots, and they are way faster. At this point, since I already had the true Knight's Edge, I decided I would make the true Excalibur, so I began getting more chlorophyte for it. Once I had made it, I wanted to test which one was better, so I used the Skeletron Prime for that, and on day 65, I determined that the true Excalibur is better. Afterwards, I went to the Hollow to update the Hollow Arena by adding a single platform way up in the sky, so that I could, walk along the bottom one and then go way up and walk along the top one. It was just better that way. I then used that arena to summon and defeat the Lilite, another modded boss, first try, and honestly this boss was unbelievably easy. Like, I'm not going to even show a boss fight for it, because I defeated it first try. It was super duper easy. From this boss, I got a Life Revitalizer, which works just as a spawn point with no house. And this was going to become very, very handy later on when I started farming bosses over and over. I also ended up getting this new sword called the Enchanted Life Blade, and it looked pretty good, but it did really shit damage. So I decided to test on the Skeleton Prime, and it works wonders. I started building the Terraria arena on day 66 and continued doing this for the next 3 entire days. It took me so long to build this because I was really worried about the difficulty of this boss, so I just ended up making a huge arena. At some point early in the stages of building this arena, I don't even know what happened. I was sent to the gods for divine retribution or some shit. I absolutely have no clue what happened here. On day 69, after finishing the arena, I began actually attempting the Plantera, and let me tell you, this boss fight was hard. Just to add on to the fire of how hard this boss fight was, day 70 and 71 got completely wiped. I have no clue where they went. They are 100% broken. But on day 69, I ended up getting the Plantera to 1%. So I'm going to show that boss fight instead, because I feel like this boss fight is a super big major one. I end up dying at the end of it, and I get it to 1%, but just pretend that I beat it. Just pretend that I beat it, because I lost footage for what I actually did. Other than the actual Plantera fight on day 70, nothing actually happened on day 71. It was pretty much a waste of an entire day. But on day 72, once day had arrived, I started a solar eclipse to try getting a broken hero sword. After a lot of grinding just before the solar eclipse ended, I got my broken hero sword and finally made the Terra Blade. I decided to use the Pumpkin Moon as a little tester for the Terra Blade, and it works wonderfully. After finishing the Pumpkin Moon on day 73, I went to go try and defeat the Golem, and can somebody tell me why it's literally just Sans from Undertale? Like, they literally just reskinned him to look like Sans. It's really funny. I ended my day still trying to defeat the Golem, but having no luck. I continued trying to defeat the Golem on day 74, but after a few more failed attempts, I was wondering why my arena was so small. Like, I could barely maneuver in it for all of the projectiles that were being thrown at me. So I did a little bit of research, and every video that I've seen has a significantly bigger arena, like quadruple the size of my arena. It really pissed me off, and I just didn't know what to do. Like, I tried mining the blocks, I tried throwing bombs and shit to see what I could do. Let me know down below if there's, like, any way to fix this, because I have no clue how to break it and make it bigger. I unfortunately just had to suck it up and continue trying, but by the end of the day, I had gotten nowhere. The next day was when I decided that I wanted to try becoming a summoner again, mainly because on the Google Doc it says that there's 2 new enchantments that are super duper good for summoners. The first one being the Tiki enchantment, which increases whip range by 20% and allows you to whip your minions to make them work harder. The second one being the Spooky enchantment, which allows all of your minions to gain an extra scythe attack. After making the Tiki enchantment, I started doing the Pumpkin Moon again to get more spooky wood, but I was barely getting anything. After going through an entire Pumpkin Moon event, I realized that it would have just been better to spawn the morning wood over and over and over again and get the wood that way, so I slept through the entire day, because I don't think I had anything else to be doing besides getting these enchantments. Once night had arrived, I defeated the morning wood over and over for the spooky wood, and I beat the Pumpkin over and over to try getting the Dark Harvest and the Raven Staff. By the time day 76 came around, I had enough wood for 1 set of spooky armor for myself, but I still need 1 more set of spooky armor for the spooky enchantment, so I changed into my summoner class, got some money, and defeated these bosses over and over again. On day 77, I still didn't have enough, so I slept through the entire day because literally everything I needed to do was at night, and began fighting these bosses over and over again, but mainly the Pumpkin this time. By the time day 78 came around, I had enough wood for the spooky armor, and I finally got a Raven Staff, so now I just need 1 more of them. Afterwards, I went to go try and defeat the Golem, and I fare much better now as a summoner than I ever would have as the melee class. I fare so much better that I was able to defeat the Golem. He's wiped me off the map, he's out of the way, even in my small ass arena. After defeating the Golem, since I really didn't get much from him, I started the Martian Invasion event to get the Xeno Staff. By the time I defeated the Martian Invasion, I still had no Xeno Staff, so I spent the rest of my day summoning the Martian Saucers to try and get it that way. On day 79, I'd finally gotten the Xeno Staff, and I began testing both the Xeno Staff and the Raven Staff to see which one is better, and unfortunately the Raven Staff ended up being better, but only because I can whip the Ravens easier while they fight. Afterwards, I began getting medals from the Old One's army because I'm curious if the armor that the Tavern Keep sells is any good, and also because I want a better sentry. While doing the Old One's army, I have no clue why, but the Raven Staff just wasn't cutting it. It was sucking balls, dude. It just wasn't doing good. After losing to the Old One's army, I began farming the Pumpkin again because maybe it isn't my summon, it's the whip that I'm using because, you know, it doesn't reach very far. By the end of the night, I got the Dark Harvest and it is so much better. I feel like I'm doing so much more damage. On day 80, I started doing the Old One's army again and it is so much better, bro. Like, it was just the whip. The whip is doing so much better. Once I had enough medals, I got the Valhalla armor, and it proves much better in an enclosed area, but since the only time I would have ever used it is for the Golem fight, I will stick with my spooky armor. Afterwards, I began trying to defeat the Lunatic Cultist, but you know that one part during the boss fight where him and his clones are all surrounding like the summoning circle and you have to hit which one is actually him? It was very hard to figure out which one I'm supposed to fucking hit in that mode, because they like changed the mask so the variation is slightly different. Eventually, I ended up figuring it out, and it's that the eyes are ever so slightly different. But not only that, the Dark Harvest, when I hit him with it, it leaves like dark matter particles around him, and that using that is much easier to find him. On day 81, I was still trying to defeat the Lunatic Cultist, but I just couldn't. Like, I can get him down to 50% health, super duper easy, like no problem at all, I'll still have full health. But as soon as he hits 50% health, shit goes absolutely haywire. On day 82, I decided to stop being really stupid and start using the arena next to my house for this fight. I continued trying to defeat him for the rest of the day and all of day 83, but on day 84 I was eventually able to defeat the lunatic cultist. The fight was absolutely insane. There's these little like stardust fragments that he shoots out to try hurt you, and what they do is that they cancel any minion that you have. So every time I would hit those, I would instantly lose the fight because all of my minions would disappear. From the lunatic cultist, the only thing that was super good was the Mutant's Pact, and it's a consumable that grants me another accessory slot. For the meantime, I ended up filling that gap with the Pumpkin's Cape, but I know I'm going to forget to use the little block it has every single time. So I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that the Eternity drops from Duke Fishron, the Empress of Light, and Betsy are all super duper good. I came to the conclusion that I was going to fight all three of them and then, choose which one is the best, but I have to get the Stardust Dragon Staff first. Right before the Stardust Pillar, there was some sort of aura that gave me super crushing debuffs depending on the class that I'm using. Thankfully, all the debuffs for this pillar were for magic, melee, and ranged, and not for summoner. I took down the pillar relatively easily and made the Stardust Dragon Staff. I ended up testing the staff on the lunatic cultist, and holy shit was it good. I defeated it in practically no time, it was crazy. Afterwards, I wanted to take down the Vortex Pillar next, but as soon as I entered the aura surrounding it, all of my minions vanished. I went over to the Solar Pillar and it was the same deal, and then it hit me. You have to use like the correct class for each pillar. So like Solar Pillar, you gotta use melee. For the Vortex Pillar, you gotta use ranged. For the Nebula Pillar, you gotta use magic, and the Stardust Pillar, you gotta use summon. And you can't use any other class. Once I had gotten home on day 85, it occurred to me that I had never used the Stardust Cell Staff before. So I ended up making one and testing it out on the Lunatic Cultist like I did with the Stardust Dragon Staff, and it did pretty much the same exact damage as the Dragon Staff, but I think the cells were just a little bit slower. Now that I had determined which summon I should be using, I went and got a Truffle Worm and headed to the ocean to defeat the first boss, Duke Fishron, and oh boy was this fish fucking fast. The first phase was super easy because its attacks didn't do too much damage, but as soon as the second phase started, shit hit the fan. There were lots of projectiles to dodge, and Duke Fishron only got faster. The third phase, it was relatively easy. All I had to do was go up really fast and back down really fast. It was just that second phase that I was hard stuck on. I had finally defeated Duke Fishron on day 86, and its Eternity Mode drop was called the Mutant Antibodies. It has a whole bunch of stuff, but all that really mattered was that it granted me an extra 20% damage at the cost of a little bit of life regeneration. Once it was equipped, I fought Duke Fishron once more to see how much of a difference it would actually make, and I was able to defeat it right away, but the goodie bag fell outside of the map, so I didn't get any of the loot. On day 87, I moved on to the next boss of my choosing, which was Betsy, and the Old One's army was super easy to defeat. And Betsy honestly wasn't much harder. After losing to it once, I defeated it the next try with little to no difficulty. From Betsy, I got the Eternity Drop Betsy's Heart, which granted me a dash, and I was finally able to dash again. And this wasn't no ordinary dash, it allowed me to dash right through attacks. Since the 20% damage difference wasn't that much, I swapped out the Mutant antibodies for Betsy's Heart. By the end of the day, I began getting the materials needed to make the Valhalla enchantment, like the Valhalla armor set and the Flying Dragon, because this enchantment will allow my healing potions to be 33% more effective, and that is a lot of percentages. I spent a bunch of day 88 in the frozen caverns to get the final piece of the Valhalla enchantment, a Viking helmet, but the undead Vikings that drop them rarely spawn in hard mode. Thankfully, with a pure stroke of luck, the very first undead Viking that I came across dropped the Viking helmet, which only has a 2% drop chance, by the way, so I got extremely lucky. I then went home and made the Valhalla enchantment. Later that night, I killed the little fairy guy that summons the Empress of Light, and this was the start of an awful journey to defeat the Empress of Light. I technically didn't even have to defeat her, but I wanted, the Eternity Drop, I wanted to see what that was, but I also wanted both the whip she drops and the summon she drops. I spent the rest of my night trying to defeat the Empress of Light. I was still trying to defeat her on the morning of day 89, and I came to a rough realization that I can only fight her at night, which makes no sense, by the way, because she's the Empress of Light, not the Empress of Night, but whatever. During the day, I began trying to take down the Vortex Pillar, but this shit was so difficult because I can only use ranged weapons. After what was like an eternity, I finally killed all of the required enemies, and I began trying to take down the pillar, but it fully regens if I die, or if I go too far away from the pillar, which makes the whole lunar event next to impossible. It was going to be so annoying to get this all done. I left the pillars alone once night had arrived to try to defeat the Empress of Light, again, but I couldn't. I continued trying to defeat the Empress of Light on day 90, but I just couldn't. I was getting pretty much nowhere. It was such a hard fight. Once day had arrived, I was back on pillar duty, but I accidentally lost my life revitalizer. The thing that allows me to set my spawn point literally anywhere. So I spent like half the day trying to figure out what boss dropped it and getting it back. After that whole fiasco, I made a surface mushroom biome so that I could get an auto hammer and make some shroomite bars to upgrade my charm of luck and get better reforges for less money. I spent the rest of my day getting absolutely nowhere on the Empress of Light. I obviously kept fighting this stupid boss until 4:30 AM on day 91, but after that I ended up spending most of my day finally taking down the Vortex Pillar. Once night arrived, I kept on fighting the Empress of Light, and I did this until the next morning. Again. Afterwards, I went to go take down the Nebula Pillar with the bubble gun that I got from the Duke Fish run, and it was pretty easy to kill all of the enemies, but taking down the pillar was a completely different story. The fact that it teleported and gave me a bunch of debuffs wasn't even the issue. The issue was the absurd amount of enemies that would spawn while I was just trying to take it down. It was next to impossible. So I ended up giving up on it for a while and went to go fight the fucking Empress of Light some more. Surprise, surprise, I didn't defeat the Empress of Light that night or the next morning. So I spent some time going to fight the Nebula Pillar, and I ended up realizing after a while that I just wasn't going to beat it like this. I then began trying to defeat the Duke Fishron for the Rageblade Typhoon because I figured it's just a better magic weapon, everything will go better, right? But I just couldn't beat him. I couldn't beat him again. No matter how hard I tried. I tried, but I could not beat him. I don't know why. At this point, I was losing all of my confidence unbelievably fast, and trying to defeat the Empress of Light over and over every single night wasn't making it any better. On day 94, I thought that maybe I could get the Morning Star and use it instead of the Dark Harvest, because it does a bunch more damage, but I'm not sure it works very well because I still couldn't beat shit. I then spent the rest of my day going to fight the Solar Pillar, but I had lost all sort of will to continue playing this game, so after I defeated the 50 enemies, I just got off. On day 95, I decided that my only goal for the next 5 days was to just beat the Empress of Light, no matter what, and maybe take down the rest of the pillars just to attempt Moonlord, but I'm sure you guys all know now that I'm not going to be beating it this video. I spent most of my day trying to take down the Solar Pillar, and while I was able to kill all the enemies just fine, I could not take down the pillar. I tried for so long, I just wasn't getting anywhere. And that's when I got fed up with losing. I went home, and I made not just Beetle Armor, but I also made Spectre Armor to deal with the Nebula Pillar. I then spent the rest of the day trying to defeat the Empress of Light, and I think you guys already know what happened. On day 96, I was still trying to defeat the Empress of Light, but I obviously got nowhere. I spent most of my day trying to take down the Solar Pillar yet again, and I killed all of the enemies, but I just couldn't defeat the pillar, even with Beetle Armor. I just couldn't do it. Later that night, I was hit with a stroke of luck, just out of nowhere after all of this depressing shit for the last few days. I was hit with the biggest stroke of luck, and I was able to defeat the Empress of Light. I'm telling you now that I've gotten her to the final stages before, but I was only able to defeat it that time because I finally understood what to do at the end. I had to sit in the laser spot because I don't shoot out right away. Unfortunately, I got absolutely nothing good from the goodie bag. But the next morning, I ended up defeating her again, and then I just used the solidifier and turned the goodie bag into the kaleidoscope. And I was about to beat her for a third time in a row, but it became morning, so she just insta-killed me. Later that day, while taking down the solar pillar, I figured that maybe I need to switch up my enchantments, so I made the beetle enchantment and equipped the huntress enchantment, and I was able to take down the solar pillar like it was nothing. I spent the rest of my night defeating the Empress of Light over and over to try getting the Terra Prism, but she just won't drop it. By the morning of day 98, I still hadn't gotten the Terra Prism. Afterwards, I was finally able to take down the Nebula Pillar with this awesome weapon that I got from the Golem ages ago. Since all of the pillars have been defeated, I attempted the Moon Lord, but I did no damage. I don't know why. I did absolutely no damage this first try, and I don't know why. I then spent my final 2 days just trying to defeat the Moon Lord, but I obviously couldn't. The Moon Lord's too hard, and I would need way more time to do it. Though, during this, I was able to figure out why I did no damage that one time. And it's because the Moon Lord, he circulates through the damage types in the game. So at one point, he'll have Stardust fragments around him, and that means you can do summon damage. Or he'll have Vortex fragments around him, and that means you can do range damage. And he just circulates through them, and you can only use that specific damage type when the thing is going on. By this point, I hadn't defeated all of the bosses, and I still had so much left to do and so much left to discover within this mod. But I was proud of myself. I had come across so many challenges and had lost so many times. But I always prevailed no matter what, and I knew I could finish where I started. But in doing so, I had no clue what kind of hell I would be walking right into.